Retail spending takes a dive as one of the oldest retailers in the country calls in administrators. Coalition MPs push to support the government's proposed tax changes. And Elon Musk's Neuralink announces its first ever implant into a human brain. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It is Wednesday, the 31st of January, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, your interview today is an absolute cracker. You are joined after the show today by Katrina Burns from Wilson Asset Management, joining you from New York.
Yes, she's an expert in, international shares, but particularly what's going on with tech stocks. And we talk about the magnificent 7 tech stocks, why they're doing so well, Nvidia being the main one in that, but, Apple, Google, etc. We talk about if you want to play those stocks but you think they're overvalued, how do you play them? What sort of companies should you think about buying if you're interested in the Magnificent Seven or if you're interested in AI, that type of thing, and you don't want to actually buy one of those big companies? It is a cracking chat. Katrina, as always, puts it in very plain English, so well worth a listen. A must listen, Michael, a must listen.
It is a must listen, Sean, especially because everyone is talking at the moment about Microsoft because it hit the $3 trillion US mark, and Apple did that last year as well. So everyone's talking about this at the moment. So Katrina has a really interesting take on that whole space. So it is well worth sticking around for after the show. The main story this morning, Sean, retail spending has taken a dive with interest rates hurting households. And one well-known retailer yesterday called in a voluntary administrator, sadly, after 90 years of trading.
Yes, so shoppers in the run-up to Christmas cut back sharply on household goods, clothes and footwear in particular. For the month, retail sales were down 2.7%, according to the Bureau of Statistics, more than correcting the 1.6% jump in November when Black Friday and Cyber Monday brought sales forward. It was the biggest monthly decline since pandemic lockdowns in mid-2020. Before that, it was the biggest since the introduction of the goods and services tax back in July 2000. You can kind of get the idea of how big a fall it was in December. Retail sales per capita are now down about 4% over the last year. The official figures confirm a stack of retailers' comments, which suggested Christmas was tough. One that unfortunately hasn't been able to make it through on its own is vacuum cleaner retailer Godfrey's. PwC was appointed voluntary administrator of Godfrey's Australian entities yesterday. Now, Godfrey's was founded in 1931 when Godfrey Cohen bought 30 vacuum cleaners from an ad in the newspaper. He then put them in the window of his father's furniture shop in Melbourne. It claims to be now the world's largest vacuum cleaner store with 170 shops across Australia and New Zealand. Unfortunately, more than 50 stores are expected to close in the next fortnight, with demand down on the back of cost of living pressures.
Yeah, it's sad, isn't it? And it's been a tough period for retailers, Sean, given we have the December quarter inflation figures out today. What does all of this mean for interest rates?
Well, the softness in retail sales comes on the back of weak December jobs data, or at least weaker December jobs data, and falling inflation data for October and November. That's consistent with the Reserve Bank leaving rates on hold at its meeting next week. However, today's CPI figure is the most important piece of data for the month. In fact, this will be one of the most important pieces of data for the year. If it's significantly above expectations, then rates could well rise next week. If it's below expectations and significantly below expectations, then there's always a slim chance the central bank could cut. Most likely, it will stay on hold.
Okay, how did local markets perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 was up again, briefly touching 7,629.8 points, which is above the best closing high ever, but below the all-time intraday high of 7,632.8 points. Now, that's 3 points below yesterday. By the close, the market was up 0.3% to 7,600 points. Wall Street was strong on Monday night, with the S&P 500 hitting a new record level that set the tone for the local market. Tech stocks were among the best performers, as were the property companies and healthcare stocks. The industrials index was the worst. CSL, Fortescue Metals Group, Goodman Group, REA and WiseTech were among the best of the large caps. QBE, Suncorp and Brambles were among the worst. Bit of corporate news around, Michael. Atlas Arteria rallied nearly 3% after it said total revenue increased 6% in the December quarter. That's because of a price rise and strong traffic performance at the company's most profitable toll road asset, the APPR motorway in France. Why do we care? Oh, guess who paid a toll on that last quarter last year?
Of course you did.
Do you know what amazing you French toll roads? We're not talking about 1 or 2 euros. We're talking about 10 euros a pop.
Oh, really?
It is incredibly expensive.
See, and that's how tourists then get lost, trying to find the back roads around there. I'm half expecting to have a report of Sean Aylmer getting lost in the French countryside because he's trying to dodge a 10 euro toll.
That's it. Well, I contributed to Atlas Arteria's efforts in France. So there you go. Copper miner Sandfire Resources rose 3.6% after it booked unaudited sales revenue of $217 million, according to its latest quarterly trading update. And how about Megaport, the cloud connectivity provider? Its share price jumped 28% after it gave its quarterly trading update. Revenue was up 5%, not huge, but shareholders, or at least investors, obviously like that company, and its share price jumped 28%.
There's a bit happening. What about international markets?
Well, Vale, the world's second biggest iron ore supplier behind BHP, posted a bigger than expected increase in production last year. The Brazilian miner seems to have had years of missteps, but if it can keep these production levels going, it will push more iron ore supply onto the market. That could affect the price, and that could certainly affect BHP, Fortescue and Rio Tinto. Coal prices have fallen to their lowest level since mid-2021 due to an oversupply in the Chinese coal market. Bitcoin's back above $43,000 a unit. And Michael, hold the front page. The Aussie dollar has done something.
Oh, there's some movement.
There is movement. It jumped 0.5 cent yesterday, the biggest daily gain in 5 weeks. Wow, the excitement on those foreign exchange trading desks. It's back above 66 US cents. Break out the champagne, I say. It's all about confidence that the Australian economy won't slow too much, alongside a growing bias towards risk assets among international investors. Now, remember, the Aussie dollar, compared to the US dollar, is a risk asset. Today's CPI figures will, of course, have an impact on the currency as well. Wouldn't it be good to have 2 days in a row where something happened to the dollar, like another 0.5 cent rise? Even a 0.5 cent fall would be fine.
Oh, just because it's a bit of movement. It's a little bit of excitement, and it'll stop you saying the same thing day after day after day. 2 in a row. Whew.
Oh, I have told you the story. In my very first job at the Sydney Morning Herald, and I was employed by 2 guys, a guy called Glenn Burge and Ross Gittins, the economics editor who's still at the Sydney Morning Herald. And my first job was to write a column every day on the Australian dollar. So if the Australian dollar goes from 65.8 cents to 65.9 cents, try and make that exciting in 400 words. Whoa. Anyway, one of the hardest jobs I've ever had in journalism. The first one, all you wanted to write was nothing happened. But no, 400 words saying nothing happened.
Oh, that is amazing. Well, after yesterday when you tried to rename the Aussie dollar and introduce the term the Dozza. Just to liven things up a little bit, you don't need it anymore. It's moving again.
And how many ways can you say dollar in a sentence without saying dollar? Often when you write a sentence, you may actually have to say the word dollar 2 or 3 times. But of course, when you write, you never want to say the same word in a sentence twice. So you'd go, the Aussie dollar jumped 1 cent with the unit having its best day since the currency became da-da-da. And that was always the trick with this, to find how many words you can use to say dollar. Is this really boring?
No, this is interesting. But Sean, it does lead me to a question for you. What do I have in common with the Aussie dollar? Sometimes we both get called the unit.
You have to live with that comment for the next 24 hours. You know that, unit. Let's go.
I look forward to that. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, airfares are halved when travellers have the option of 3 carriers rather than 1, according to new research by the Competition Task Force, raising a few questions over Labor's decision last year to reject Qatar's bid to provide additional flights.
Assistant Minister for Competition Andrew Lee says airline competition plays a key role in delivering cheaper flights for Australians, according to a report in the Australian newspaper. When one airline services a route, airlines average 39.6 cents per kilometre. With two competing airlines, that average fare drops to 28.2 cents a kilometre. Three competitors, it's down to 19.2 cents a kilometre. In other words, the price per kilometre is halved when there's three competitors flying a route compared with the situation when there's only a single monopoly airline. Lee also said that the mere threat of competition in the aviation sector has, on average, helped to lower prices. Treasurer Jim Chalmers last year announced a rolling 2-year competition review chaired by Kerry Schott, and which includes Productivity Commission Chair Danielle Wood and former ACCC Chair Rod Sims. It came after Industry Minister Catherine King rejected Qatar Airways' request to increase capacity in Australia as against the national interest. That was back in July. What we now know, the more carriers flying, the better it is for consumers. I mean, I suppose it makes sense, but to actually have those numbers, 39.6 cents per kilometre, one airline to 19.2 cents, it's pretty stark.
I was going to say that because, I mean, it is logical, really, isn't it? That as soon as there's more competition, costs are going to come down. But to actually have it in those numbers, it is really quite confronting just to go, okay, there is a major, major benefit to having additional airlines flying those routes.
Yeah.
Now, Sean, a growing number of coalition MPs believe opposition leader Peter Dutton shouldn't stand in the way of Labor's more generous tax cuts for low and middle income earners.
Coalition MPs are divided on whether to waive Anthony Albanese's overhaul of Stage 3 through the Parliament, which is expected to cost taxpayers about $28 billion more over the next decade. They know that if the package passes, it'll pretty much be politically impossible to repeal tax cuts, which are worth an extra $800 for workers earning between $45,000 and $135,000, according to The Australian. Senior Liberal sources said there was a strong likelihood the coalition would seek to amend the legislation, but ultimately not vote against it, according to media reports. The opposition hopes it can neutralise Labor's political attack and provide clear air for the coalition to focus on the Prime Minister's broken promise of the Stage 3 tax cuts. All political games, but it is quite interesting that we're having the coalition now saying, maybe we should actually support these tax cuts. As you said a couple of days ago, very hard to argue against 89 people getting a tax cut.
Indeed. Now, Australia's largest fruit and vegetable company, Costa Group, is set to go private after shareholders voted in favour of a $1.5 billion buyout bid from a consortium led by United States private equity giant Payne Schwartz.
More than 98% of eligible proxy votes cast prior to the scheme meeting yesterday were in favour of the $3.20 per share offer, which values Costa equity at $1.5 billion. The Costa board back in September agreed to a $100 million reduction to the original offer price of $1.6 billion from the consortium. Costa chair Neil Chatfield told the meeting he was sympathetic to the criticism from retail shareholders that the price wasn't high enough, but that final offer of $3.20 was pretty much at the upper end of the valuation range from independent expert Kroll. Costa grows berries, mushrooms, citrus fruit, tomatoes and avocados. It operates 7,200 hectares of farmland in Australia. It's been listed on the ASX since 2015. It also has facilities in Morocco and China. But like a bunch of companies, we talked about this yesterday, it's set to delist from the ASX as well. February 8 is the scheduled day to say goodbye to Costa.
Now, Sean, Indonesia miner Nickel Industries, I like that name because it kind of tells you what it does, doesn't it? Now, it's upped its dividend and announced a $151 million share buyback, sending its share price up 21% at a time when Australian-based producers are struggling.
Nickel Industries, the biggest pure-play nickel producer listed on the ASX, announced record production and earnings from its Indonesian mines and nickel processing assets in the December quarter. Its quarterly report also talked up its green credentials and safety record, something local producers have complained about Indonesian nickel. Some Aussie nickel miners are hoping they can attract a green premium. Nickel prices have tumbled over the past year and local producers Resources Minister Madeleine King, unions and the Western Australian government held a crisis meeting in Perth last week about it. Ms King raised the prospect of government support for the sector. More than 1,000 job losses have been announced in Western Australia already. That's since the start of December. More are likely. Certainly that industry is struggling, but not Nickel Industries, which listed on the ASX but operates out of Indonesia.
Retailer City Chic has confirmed a media report that offshore buyers have been circling the company's North American business.
The women's specialty plus-size fashion retailer fielded several informal approaches for its North American business, according to a statement. That sent its share price up more than 20% yesterday. The retailer has had a hard time of it, though. After trading at more than $6.50 a share in October 2021, it fell to as low as 25 cents a share last November. Yesterday, it closed at 54 cents a share.
All right, one more before we get to international news, and this is fascinating, Sean. The share price of sleep apnea company ResMed jumped yesterday after one of its main competitors in the US agreed to stop selling machines.
Yes, so device maker Philips has recalled more than 5 million pressurised breathing machines due to risks that their internal foam can break down over time, leading users to inhale tiny particles and fumes while they sleep. This has been going on for a while. The company first announced the problem in mid-2021. Philips is a big competitor to ResMed in this sleep apnea area. Efforts by Philips to repair or replace the machines have dragged on for years, frustrating patients in the US and other countries. Under the agreement's terms, Philips would continue servicing previously sold machines in the US, but they can't sell new ones until it meets corrective actions laid out by the FDA. That means the other providers of sleep apnea machines, like ResMed, probably benefit.
Okay, turning to international news, it might not be the most valuable car maker in the world, but Toyota remains the largest, Sean, selling more passenger vehicles than any other manufacturer last year. That's for the fourth consecutive year.
Global sales, including those of subsidiaries Daihatsu and Hino, rose 7% to a record 11.2 million cars in 2023. That's a lot of cars. Volkswagen came in at number 2, delivering 9.2 million units. Recovering supply chains and steady demand in North America and Europe last year helped Toyota boost production and finally improve profits. In the electric vehicle world, BYD co-sold around 3 million units. That's the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturer. It sold around 3 million units last year compared to Tesla's 1.8 million. Toyota sold just 104,000 battery EVs. Not very many. Obviously, a lot of hybrids. Who doesn't have a RAV4, I say? But only about 100,000 battery EVs. Funny thing is, Tesla's market valuation is about $600 billion US dollars. Toyota's about $280 billion US dollars. So it just shows, the whole future earnings thing. Tesla, so 11.2 million cars from Toyota, 1.8 from Tesla, so less than 20%. And Tesla's market valuation is twice that of Toyota.
That's amazing. And even actually just looking at EVs as well, with BYD selling around 3 million last year compared to Tesla. I didn't realize that BYD was so far in front of Tesla in terms of production.
Yeah. I mean, actually, it overtook Tesla. Tesla had a bad year last year and BYD had a good year, but still, that's a long way in front, isn't it?
Yeah, smashing them. And finally, Sean, Elon Musk says the first human patient has received a brain implant from his startup Neuralink, which is a significant step forward for the company that aims to one day let humans control computers with their minds.
In a post on X, Mr. Musk said the patient was recovering well and that initial results of the procedure were promising. Neuralink's brain implant aims to help people with traumatic injuries operate computers using only their thoughts. Last May, the company received US Food and Drug Administration approval to conduct its first human trials. Late last year, Neuralink recruited patients with quadriplegia due to cervical spinal cord injury or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis for the trial. Mr. Musk said the implant will enable control of your phone or computer and through them almost any device just by thinking. Mr. Musk said Neuralink had good results for neuron spike detection, meaning the implant was getting recordings from the brain. Neuralink has already conducted extensive tests on animals, and those tests, monkeys have been able to play computer games just using their brains alone. It really is in the futuristic world, but wouldn't it be fantastic if people with severe injuries could actually, work phones and computers and that just using their mind?
It feels and sounds like science fiction, but
Yeah.
it is quite remarkable, the potential that would be absolutely life-changing.
Totally. And not just for the people, but for their families and their carers. Would be wonderful.
Yeah, amazing. All right. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Your guest today, Katrina Burns from Wilson Asset Management.
All about tech stocks in the US, particularly the Magnificent Seven, the big 7 tech stocks that make up about 28% of the S&P 500. Also talk about how you can get in on artificial intelligence, that type of thing, without buying the tech companies. Fascinating chat.
Yeah, it certainly is. And of course, we're not an investment podcast and you should seek professional advice before making investment decisions. But it's really interesting listening to a professional like Katrina and what she thinks of the current situation, because it is fascinating. It's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Also, today is, of course, Wednesday, which means there's a new episode of How Do They Afford That, which is our sister podcast with Canna Campbell, financial planner. And Sean, today I reckon is probably almost the most serious episode we've ever done on that podcast, because it is all about financial abuse, and it is about the warning signs, the red flags to look out for, basically what financial abuse is and what to do if you think that you or someone that you know might actually be in a situation where they are the victim of financial abuse, what it is, what to look out for, and how to help them. It is really important. It is more prevalent than you think. And there's just some really helpful steps and tips to help someone out, because you never know who might actually need it, because it is remarkably well hidden.
A must listen, Michael. A must listen.
It certainly is. And I'll put a link in today's show notes as well. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Unit.
It's Wednesday, the 31st of January, 2024. I like that. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, and Facebook. And if you go to one of those platforms, you can check out one of the new videos and things that we're doing, and you can see that I am most definitely not much of a unit. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.